they can't speak out. They can't go and ring up the local newspaper and spill their story. Even if the newspaper or call you or call me, they can't do this stuff, because if they move, then that's the end of them, or the end of their children, or the end of something. It's not smart for them to do that. So what they do very quietly is they will do something very, very indirectly that supports you and me in continuing to do this story. They're rooting for us. You see, they're rooting for us. There are a lot of people there who are rooting for us. We know that. We've been told that by a number of people, the white hats on the inside. They're doing everything they can do to help you and me and a lot of other people out there do our work. Now, then you get the whole chess game being played, because knowing that this is happening, then of course this disinformation will come trickling down. So now I use this just as an example because it comes to mind. After we met with Peterson for many, many hours, and he told us a whole bunch of unbelievable things, some of which went on the video. After that, we've had a number of phone conversations with him. And then in some of those phone conversations, and I won't go into any detail here at all. In some of those phone conversations, he said, "I've just heard this from one of my mates. I've just heard this from one of our friends on the inside." Now, we don't know whether to believe that or not because he is necessarily providing us with any disinformation, but because then he becomes a problem to them. But at the same time, they're trying to, one has to think in a military way. You have to think like a spook. You have to think like you're on the other side of the chessboard trying to figure out what to do. They know that he's still in contact with us. They're not going to shoot him in the head, because then that confirms everything he's ever told us. So that's the last thing they do. But what they do is they see if they can twist it round. And then they twist it round by offering him a little bit of a tidbit of information, hoping that he'll believe it, and hoping that he'll tell us, and hoping that we'll believe it, and hoping that then we say it. So then we have to use some kind of a filter. And some people, going back to the Clay and Sean Pickering story, some people in the UFO community have not touched that because they feel they can't correlate this information about the silicon-based life form to anything else that they've ever heard. They're worried that this might be a very complex, very subtle, very clever disinformation ploy to get people fighting in the UFO community. It happens all the time. And they'll use credible people. They'll use people who believe the story, because a source who believes what he's saying is going to be much more valuable than somebody who's been ordered to lie. You see, somebody who believes what he's saying is going to be really credible. They're going to say, "Well, I really believe this information. I've got these documents, and I spoke to this person, and I also heard this from another person, and this is what I really think is happening, and everything they say is true." And they're absolutely credible. They look you in the eye. You can feel that they're good people. You can feel they're being honest, and you still don't know whether the information is true. This is the problem, because we don't know the provenance. And so what we do, all we can do, if somebody tells us something, we say, "Right, how do you know this? Who told you? How sure are you? Is it single source? Did you hear this from two different people? How long ago did you hear it? What happened just before you were told that?" We're trying to get the lie of the land. And what I try and do personally, if I can, is when I'm writing a report, I always say, I always put little caveats in this, and I'm always wanting to take every opportunity to clarify. Both Kerry and I do this, that this is what we were told. The person who told us, we believe that he believed it. Maybe it's not true. And this loops right back to this thing about the 27th of November. There are all kinds of caveats there. See, but the problem is, and this is the problem that we have in this job that we're doing, because even though we put the caveats there, and Peterson put the caveats there, and we're thinking, well, I don't know about this, but this is what he said, and it would be cool if it were true, Then it gets copied and copied, and it gets emailed, and it gets on someone else's blog, and then someone else states it in a radio show, and so on and so forth. And the next thing you know, it's like, this is what Project Camelot is saying, and then on the 28th of November, we'll be liars. You know, and we're not. We're just being reporters. But we're trying to be reporters with as much responsibility as we can. We're not Fox News that says, we report, you decide. You know, we're not removing ourselves from any responsibility here. But at the same time, we're trying to put together what we feel is credible information. We can kind of see patterns. We're trying to say to people, we think we see this pattern, but maybe you see a different pattern, but let's check it all out. We're learning all the time. We know that some of our information is not correct, because it can't be, because we get people contradicting each other. We do feel that between 80 and 90% of our information is accurate. I used to say 95%. I think it's probably between 80 and 90. But that's quite a heavy load of good information. We're on the lookout for people who feed us crazy stuff. People send us crazy stuff by email all the time. But that's because it's easy for a kid to write a crazy story and say, hey, I'm a whistleblower. You know, there's some, I mean, it's like, sometimes you can kind of tell immediately. You know, when somebody says there's a PhD scientist and they can't even spell, you know, then it's like, okay, there's something wrong here. And at the same time, sometimes you pick up one of these little threads, and we do use our intuition for what it's worth. Kerry and I both use our intuition when we're both thinking there's something important here, then we tend to follow it, and then we'll invest some of our time in checking it out. It's very important not to front load people meaning if somebody says, this is an invented story, this is an invented example. If somebody wrote to us and says, I was at the Mars base, anyone can say that, then rather than saying, oh, this is what Henry Deacon told us, is this true? You see. Then the kid in the basement playing a joke says, yes, it is. You see, that's not a very good question to ask. You've got to ask open questions. You've got to say, what's it like? You mustn't front, you know, what did you see? You don't ask them any questions to confirm anything at all, because then all they're going to do is say yes, and so on and so forth. And sometimes we come across information that we just don't buy it at all. And there are some people in the research community that we just don't buy their information. There's something wrong with it. It doesn't fit. Now, we may be wrong in some of that information. We may have bought some information that doesn't fit. We get a lot of information about Dan Burish, for example. People say, he's a liar, he's crazy, you know, he's this, he's that. He's not a liar and he's not crazy. His information isn't all correct, I'm certain about that. But he's a good-hearted guy. He's heavily controlled. He's now been turned against us. And that's because we trod on someone's toes after the Zurich conference. And we don't know what we did to trod on those toes, but Dan Burish is now corralled by a bunch of people who regard us as some kind of an enemy. And we are not an enemy. We will continue to present his information with as much intellectual honesty as we can do. And it's just a little bit of it's a tough